They say wars are fought with guns, tanks, and steel. But sometimes, the deadliest weapon is silence. Silence kept by someone you'd never expect. Not a general, not a spy in uniform, but a woman in white, carrying bandages and morphine, and a secret so powerful it could have ended the bloodshed years earlier. Her name has been erased from history books, yet whispers of her linger like smoke after a fire. Soldiers who lived to tell their story spoke of a nurse who seemed to know more than she should, her eyes searching beyond wounds, her hands steady even under shell fire. But what they didn't know was that every time she leaned over a stretcher, she wasn't just saving lives, she was carrying the heaviest truth of the war. It began in a field hospital on the outskirts of a city drowning in chaos. Planes thundered overhead, sirens wailed, and rows of cots stretched farther than the eye could see. Men groaned in agony, doctors barked orders, and in the middle of it all was her calm, quiet, almost invisible. Her colleagues knew her as Nurse Elise, the kind of woman who worked until her hands bled. She never raised her voice, never complained, and yet, there was something guarded in the way she glanced over her shoulder, something unfinished in the way she wrote her reports. What no one saw was that hidden in her apron pocket wasn't just medical tools, it was a folded letter, sealed and smudged, that could change the course of the war. She had carried it for weeks, close to her body, closer than her own heartbeat. A letter written by someone powerful, someone who wasn't supposed to speak the truth. The story of how it came into her hands was as unexpected as it was dangerous. One night, as bombs fell in the distance, she had been sent to tend to a captured officer. He was pale, half-conscious, and knew he wouldn't survive the night. With trembling fingers he gripped her wrist and forced a letter into her palm. His voice, ragged but urgent, whispered, "Don't let them bury this with me. If the world knows what's inside, the war will end." And then he was gone. From that moment, Elise became more than a nurse. She was a vault of secrets, and the key to peace rested in her possession. But here's where it twists. Because Elise wasn't sure if she should believe it. She hadn't opened the letter, not yet. She told herself it was safer that way. If she didn't know the truth, no one could torture it out of her. Still, the weight of that envelope grew heavier with every passing day, as if the ink itself was pressing on her chest. Rumors swirled through the camp. Soldiers spoke of a hidden pact, of generals who already knew the war was lost but kept fighting for pride. Elise began to notice small things, coded messages in the supply crates, hushed conversations that stopped when she entered the room, an officer's gaze that lingered too long on her pocket. Someone knew she had it. Someone was watching. Then came the night that nearly broke her. The hospital was raided by enemy scouts. She barely escaped with her life, carrying not only the wounded but the secret pressed against her ribs. As she fled into the darkness, she realized something terrifying. Both sides wanted that letter destroyed, because peace, as beautiful as it sounded, would expose lies that generals, presidents, even kings had built their power on. Days turned into weeks. Elise hid the letter beneath her mattress, inside her medical bag, even sewed it into the lining of her uniform. She began to dream of it. Nightmares where the paper burned in her hands, or where faceless men dragged her away before she could reveal the truth. She lived in constant fear, yet she kept her silence, waiting for the right moment. And then, the moment came. It was during a prisoner exchange at dawn, soldiers from both sides standing in tense silence by a riverbank. Elise had been ordered to accompany the wounded. Her presence meant to show neutrality. But as the sun rose and the mist lifted, she saw him, the man who had once been her brother's friend, now an officer for the enemy. His eyes widened when he saw her, then darted to her pocket. She froze. He knew. In that heartbeat, Elise made a choice that would haunt her forever. She reached into her apron, pulled out the folded, worn letter, and pressed it into his hand. No words, just a look, pleading and defiant all at once. And then, as quickly as it began, the exchange ended. She never saw him again. The war dragged on. More lives were lost. Elise remained at her post, never speaking of the letter again. Some said she betrayed her side. Others said she gave the letter to the only man who could deliver it safely. The truth? No one knows. The letter vanished into history like smoke into the wind. But years later, when the war finally ended, documents surfaced, fragments of negotiations, hints of betrayals, whispers of leaders who had secretly tried to surrender years before. and in those fragile papers historians found evidence of a nurse, a woman in white who had stood at the crossroads of history, holding a secret that could have spared millions, if only the world had been ready to listen. Was she a coward, a hero, a traitor? Perhaps all three. But one thing is certain. Without ever firing a bullet, without ever commanding an army, she carried a weapon of truth that was more dangerous than any bomb. And maybe that's why she was forgotten. Because sometimes the most dangerous stories aren't the ones we celebrate. They're the ones too heavy for nations to admit. So, the next time you think of war, remember this: not all heroes wore medals. Some wore aprons stained with blood, carried bandages in one hand, and in the other, a secret that could have ended it all. The hidden nurse, the silent carrier of truth, lost in time, but never truly gone.